second installment of Snap Judgement with Apex Magazine. I'm KT Bryski, your narrator and host this afternoon. For those not familiar with Snap Judgement, here's how it works. Earlier this month, genre writers were invited to submit the first 250 words of a short story or novel. With Apex the entries are ordered randomly, and all identifying elements are stripped from each manuscript. A few minutes prior to the start of the live stream, our judges are sent a document containing all the anonymous entries so that they can read along. I will read aloud each entry until completed, or all three editors have raised their hands. And when does an editor raise their hand? When that member has reached a point in the story that they would stop reading and reject the submission. Our judges will then provide feedback on the strengths and weaknesses of the opening. We'll repeat this process until 90 minutes have passed, or we run out of submissions. Now, I would like to introduce our editorial board members. First up, Jason Sizemore is the publisher and editor-in-chief of Apex Books and Apex Magazine. He's been nominated 3 times for the Hugo Award, is a finalist for the Stoker Award, and has had over 30 stories published over the years. Next, Lesley Conner is the managing editor of Apex Books and Apex Magazine. She, along with Jason, oversees novel and short fiction acquisitions. She's the author of the alt history horror, The Weight of Chains, and a number of short stories. And finally, our esteemed guest panelist for Snap Judgement number 2 is Wendy Wagner. Wendy is the editor-in-chief of Nightmare Magazine and the managing and senior editor of Lightspeed Magazine. She's the author of 4 novels, the latest being The Deer Kings from Journalstone Press in August 2021. And I am your host, KT Bryski. I'm a fantasy author and podcaster, currently serve as the podcast producer for the Apex Magazine podcast and co-chair of the Ephemera reading series. And you can catch our second birthday bash for Ephemera on November 17th. As a final reminder, Snap Judgement is not the Squid Game. Our panelists are here for one reason, to help writers claw their way out of the slush pile. And we hope their insight and recommendations are helpful and entertaining for everyone watching. All right, I'm ready. I think our esteemed editor panel is ready. Let's begin. Our first story is a science fiction horror piece. I'm going to begin. The ghosts gather on the burnt trees like a murder of crows, hungry-eyed and conspiratorial. Black feathery wisps dance around them, while talon-like hands grip to charred branches. They can see me, but they don't yet know I can see them. I imagine them coming for me, skeletal hands peeling back my exosuit, ready to consume my soul. I shake the image away. Only one person, dead or alive, is doing the soul-consuming here. When I'm opposite the tree, I stop, locking the knees in my exosuit so I can lift the equipment from my back without breaking something. It's easier with the upgraded parts from my last job. That one had been straightforward. A clean sweep of the ocean floor of a civilization taken by an apocalyptic flood. The ghosts there were placid and calm, drifting like jellyfish in the deep. Here, the heat and dry has made them hungry and irritable. But hungry and irritable means more energy, which means stronger fuel to sell. I count the ghostly figures before me. 12 lost souls on this tree alone. The harvesting equipment props up like a tripod, a mirrored lens on the front. 4 petal-shaped plates fold out from the sides, and I angle them towards the ghosts. They're looking at me intently now, unmoving. It takes a few seconds for the machine to initiate, but it's enough for the ghost to realize something is happening. One lifts its arm and lets out a guttural cry. And that is the end of the submission. Over to the panel.
Okay, so I'll go first on this one. Lesley will go first on the second one, and Wendy will go first on the third, and then we'll rotate. Okay, yeah, this one quite chilling. Has a really nice exit line there. Lets out a guttural cry. Excellent way to end your introduction. And also it has a fairly interesting first couple lines. They're good enough to keep me reading. It wasn't until the second, third paragraphs that some of the more effective imagery got their claws into me and really got me interested in the piece. I did feel like there was a time or two where there was some non-essential details added. Maybe they are essential to the story on down the road. For example, talking about, the upgraded parts from the last job and then telling us what that last job was. Yeah, if that's not pertinent, then you may want to consider excising that or making sure that it's brought up later in the piece. I would definitely keep reading. I think this is a pretty strong opening. Lesley?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Once I kind of realized that this was like a strange version of the Ghostbusters where they're like collecting the ghosts for energy, I was like, that's kind of horrifying, because at least in Ghostbusters they're collecting the ghosts because they're like physically haunting people. So the like you're kind of flipping, like the Ghostbusters are no longer the good guys, they're bad because they're eating these ghosts for energy, which drew me in, because I was like, oh, that's kind of like different, and like, because normally, it does say that these ghosts are hungry, but this person's obviously going to them. So that definitely snagged me in. I wasn't blown away with the initial couple of lines. It kind of felt like there was a lot of detail and stuff going on that it almost felt cluttered. Like I would like to see it streamlined a bit to make it a little bit stronger, to get us to that horrifying part where it's like they're sucking these ghosts up for energy. Because that's where you got me. Like that's where you got me to the point where I was like, ooh, like I like this and I want to see where it's going. So I would really suggest kind of streamlining that very beginning to make it less cluttered, and because details are good. You want them in there. You want us to be able to see, but at the same time, you don't want it to get in the way of the thing that's actually the hook that's going to hook your reader in. And I kind of just feel like these first couple of lines could really be streamlined out to get us to where we get wrapped into this story where it's like, I want to know about this person who's like an evil Ghostbuster. Like that's what hooked me, not the descriptions of the ghost.
One thing that I think this submission did really well is introducing immediately that, like I didn't need to read the tag as it's science fiction horror, because it showed itself right away in the first paragraph by bringing in the exosuit. Science fiction horror is my favorite genre, and it's one I almost never get to buy because it's really difficult to get a good balance, like the perfect balance between horror elements and science fictional elements, and have the world building come together in a way that's really satisfying. So for me, what really was interesting about this piece is that right away we got, some sense of like why we're in this science fictional world, and immediately it's really easy and clear that something horrifying is going on because you've got ghosts and you're eating and you're sucking up ghosts for energy. I'm really glad that we saw so quickly like why the main character is going after these ghosts, because it's always nice to get a sense of the main character's purpose, their goal, to have some sense of like what's motivating them. So for me, that was a real strong point of this story. Kind of a little bit with Lesley on this, about how the first paragraph had a lot going on for it, which on one hand, I love seeing everything about ghosts. So of course, like, oh yay, ghost stuff, woohoo! But on the other hand, I also for me, one of the most important things is to get a really strong sense of the character first thing. Like for me, that's what is most yummy about a story, is being really deeply embedded in the character's point of view. And maybe that first paragraph has some nice language, it has some neat descriptions, it's strong writing, but it's not quite as like personal and character filled as it goes on to be. And I see, here's where you'll get opposite feedback sometimes. For me, I loved knowing that little bit about how the suit had been upgraded and a little bit about the background of the previous mission, because for me that was a world building thing that really helped me in the science fictional element. So that's one of the great things about panels like this, is that sometimes you'll get totally opposite kinds of advice. But what a treat for our first submission on this panel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good way to start. And to the author of this, if they are watching, because really good sci horror is kind of rare, please finish this. And if you're feeling up to it, send it to Apex first. Then if we don't take it, send it to Nightmare. Just kidding. Just kidding. But yeah, send it to one of us.
All right, what a start. Our next piece is a horror piece. I was famous for my ability to resurrect the dead. Well, famous is a strong word, but I was well known in the historic preservation community. I would become much more infamous after my dealings with the Hotel Altanolum, the forgotten building I found myself standing in front of on that sunny October day. A longtime client of mine purchased the old mess of concrete and brick on a whim, more for the land she stood on than the building herself, and I was there to prove we could rehabilitate the old girl. If I couldn't, he was going to tear her down. The building was a relic, over a century old, and she'd been abandoned for half that time. Her once beautiful Art Deco facade was now a cracked collage of mold, mildew.
3 hands, Katie. All right, so Lesley, you go first this time.
Okay, I just feel like this, like, I really love that first line. Like, I was famous for my ability to resurrect the dead. And then I kind of felt like we went into like a lot of info dumping. There's just a lot of details here that I don't feel are helping to move the story forward, because, you're going into details about this hotel and the design of the hotel, and it's like, okay, but I don't know, it just lost me because I felt like there was just nothing there that made me feel like I wanted to keep reading beyond like that first line. That first line, I was like, okay, we're gonna get into this like really interesting thing, and then it just sort of petered out for me. I don't know. I don't feel like I have anything helpful to say. Jason, I'm passing to you.
Oh, well, Wendy goes second this time.
I was going to say passing to Wendy.
Yeah, so like Lesley said, I really liked that first line. I thought it was really cool and fun. But unfortunately for me, when I got to the second paragraph, I put up my hand right at the end of the next sentence, really. And that's because instead of moving into a space where we feel like where I felt like I was more engaged with the narrator and more engaged with the place that they were at, which I believe can be a fantastic setting. Instead, the way that the details about it were being delivered were not in like a sensory connected to the like narrator kind of way, but just sort of like, how you'd write it down if maybe you were selling it, you know, to a really bad real estate listing. It didn't feel, it was really invested in having this kind of fun, lightweight tone, which can be a delight, but it wasn't, it wasn't hooking me in with like a physicality or like a feeling full from the narrator. That's what I felt like.
Completely agree with the both of you. So there are numerous ways to open a story, and two of those are, you know, with an interesting declaration. Another is draw the reader into the story via the use of setting. And I think the writer here has tried to do a hybrid, and it just kind of throws off the reader here. It threw me off. I wanted to get directly into, is Oz disagreeing with my analysis, Lesley? I wanted to get into, you know, the setup of this person is able to resurrect the dead, and I thought that's what the story was going to be about. And then, as Wendy says, we get this real estate listing, basically. And I raised my hand once I heard that the third paragraph was continuing that real estate listing. So I think you got to make a decision here on how you want to approach your opening. Do you want to make the house the story, or do you want to make this person with this unique ability the story?
If Oz will allow me to talk, which he's not going to because Bradley's going to come in the door. I'm wondering, the more that we get into this and the more we talk about this, is resurrecting the dead speaking of resurrecting dead houses?
That's what I assumed.
And that's kind of where I'm going, and I'm like, I am so sorry, my house is still but again, I feel like we had a buildup of something with that first line, and then the follow through just wasn't as exciting to me. So yeah, I mean, I agree with what everybody is saying, and I apologize for my dog. I'm going to mute again.
Don't worry about Oz. He's cute. So
Yeah.
he gets away with it.
I just like to say, I love shows about resurrecting old houses. So this is, I'm like kind of the target audience for this. So, you know, it's not a bad premise. It's a cool premise.
Yeah, right.
I'm bringing those things together. It's just maybe right now it's not like living up to, it's just not introducing the premise in a way it's most exciting.
There is a tonal dissonance.
Yeah.
Good piece otherwise, though. All right.
Well, with the guest editor joining the panel with Oz and a guest host and narrator here with Mr. Guinness on my lap.
It's Guinness.
Guinness the cat has joined as well. So with our
the world famous voice actor.
World famous voice actor, author, con runner, model, Twitter celebrity at Guinness is a cat, but this isn't about him. But he is going to help me read our next piece, which is a dark fantasy / horror. It begins, not once in her 15 years had Cora been given leave to touch the Golightly family bezoar where it nested, close at hand against a time of need, in its hawthorn wood box atop the kitchen fireplace mantel. Cora knew her granny, and her granny's granny before her, set great store by the madstone as a remedy for a host of concerns. A body poisoned or snake bit, a well gone sour, a dog run mad with the hydrophobia, or a batch of the recipe turned rambunctious. To Cora's mind, walking in to find Granny keeled over senseless, her eyes milky and the skin beneath shadowed the sickly purple of a week-old bruise, qualified as a concern. Not to mention the thick string of bile trailing from the old woman's slack mouth, that had rendered itself into a pool of corruption on the limestone floor and started making lurching motions towards the now open back door, faintly pulsing with surly and rancorous intent. It called for a forward act. Cora's granny worked the powers. Practically the whole county had taken it upon themselves to share that fact with Cora from the first day she'd been set down on Granny's doorstep 10 years before, all woeful eyes and corn tassel braids, with a picture of her dead mommy wrapped up careful in the one change of clothes folded into her pasteboard valise, a small bruised apple, unmoored by misfortune and fallen back upon the suspect mercies of a suspect family tree. A tree with witchy roots. And that is the end. Over to Wendy.
Well, that was really, really fun to read. The first sentence is really kind of long, and there's kind of a lot going on in it. But once I read the word Bezor, I was extremely excited. I might maybe trim that up a bit because it's just so many adjectives before you get to the exciting stuff. But then the second paragraph was like so fun with, the bile that is like running away on its own power. That was the kind of gross detail that I find extremely compelling. I have kind of mixed feelings on like old-timey country voices. Sometimes it can feel like a cheat because it implies like an instant, it's like a very easy way to build your character right off the bat. But this was mostly done in a way that I found pretty enjoyable. I liked the dog having hydrophobia. So for me, it wound up being like an enjoyable thing. And sometimes I think it can be a little bit dangerous to like have that cold open and then rewind back into what happens. But the description of the young main character was extremely charming with her corn tasseled hair and the suspect family tree, that I would definitely keep reading this. Jason?
Okay, I enjoyed this. I wasn't blown away by it. It's interesting that Wendy brought up the voice. I was thinking, since this looks like perhaps a granny witch story, and granny witches, big in Appalachia, particularly, from, my background in Southeast Kentucky, I always heard about granny witches. I think you can lean into the regional dialect just a little bit more, not overdo it, but I do think it would give the piece some flavor that I feel like it's missing right now. Yeah, you really need to edit that first mouthful of a sentence. I almost raised my hand, but then I was thinking, okay, well, it like Wendy said, it has a Bezor in it, and I was like, okay, someone is using words like that. I'll give them a little bit longer, and I'm glad it did because I did enjoy this. Lesley?
I agree with both Wendy and Jason. That first sentence is just jam-packed. But I almost feel like most of the sentences in this are very jam-packed. Like they are full of description and just like trying to get everything in there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I would suggest maybe breaking it up a little bit so that you don't have so many very high descriptive sentences one on top of the other. Like if you look at that second paragraph, it's only 2 sentences, and the one goes on for, it's like 3 entire lines. And it's just, I like a long sentence every once in a while, but I feel like it really, especially if the entire story is this way, for a reader, it gets kind of a bit exhausting because you have to stop and go, okay, I need to parse which descriptions go with what and what's actually happening. So I think that I would suggest definitely kind of breaking up some of that, making some of your sentences maybe a little bit shorter and some of them, middle length, just so that you don't have so many very intensely descriptive sentences back to back to back to back. Because when you do that, it can make a reader tired, because you have to kind of like stop and go, okay, that was a mouthful. Let me digest that mouthful before moving on to the next one. Whereas if you give littler sentences in there, it gives the reader a kind of a mental break. But other than that, I liked the description. I liked what was going on. I just was like, wow, these are super long sentences.
I think one thing that goes well with what Lesley said and tying into what Jason and I were talking about is that these long, very descriptive sentences can actually kind of undercut the kind of dialect voice that you're going for, because we tend to associate long, adjective-laden sentences with more highbrow literature, and particularly like 17th century and British literature is loaded with that stuff. So mixing up your sentence structure, I think, would probably give even slightly more emphasis to the local dialect. That's what I think, maybe, but it's hard to know just like off the top of my head.
Cool. Any other thoughts from the panel? All right. Onwards to our next piece, which is dark fantasy. I have a confession to make. When the child was born, I hoped it wouldn't survive. I looked into its wide eyes and saw a tall tree grown in shadow. Its roots were a cage for my bones. My marrow was its milk. Still, I did what a mother must. I fed it. I changed its soiled linens. But I didn't sing to it, and perhaps I should have. A soft melody, like a light summer sweet rain, to water its soul and renew mine. When the child died, the women of the village flocked. My husband Fenwick invited them over, including my younger sister, Mallow, to help me, or so he said, to ease his own wanting comforts more like. The women brought gifts of dried chasteberry, parsley stems, and torn jasmine petals. Mallow bound my chest with cloth strips, a remedy until the herbs passed my lips and took root. The tightened linen hurt at first, but soon enough it became another raised scar, another mar against stretch-marked skin. I endured purred words of understanding and the sidelong looks of disapproval when I didn't respond in kind. But I couldn't ignore Mallow's half-smile when nearest Fenwick. The child was wrapped in woad-dyed lace. Copper bells tied to strings dangled from its bare feet. Fenwick placed an uprooted sapling into my hands. It had matching bells on its infant branches. He never acted without purpose. My refusals never stopped him either. Still, no one knew my secret. Not even him. And I believe we're back to Jason first.
Okay. I really liked some of the language in this and kind of passive prose. It's very sweet and at times moving. It's very quiet. It does a good job of doing some of the heavy lifting that the beginning of a story should do. Like it gives you, an idea of conflict and maybe something that instigated what is going to happen in the rest of the piece. Introduces the main characters and gave us an idea of a little bit of the type of society she's living in. I would probably keep reading a little bit further, just
just to see where the story is going. I won't admit to being blown away, but also it my interest level was high enough to get me through the first 250 words.
I absolutely loved the very, very beginning. Like those first 2 sentences, I was like, wow, okay, this is going to be a super interesting, story where you have this disconnect between, this child and this mother and the fact that we didn't get a name. The baby was just called It. That I was like super excited about. Like that beginning, I was just like, yes, like I want that story. And then the story kind of veered, and it doesn't seem like that is where the story's going. It seems like more the story is going to be about the relationship between this woman and her husband and the secret she has, which I, like Jason, at this point, I would keep reading a little bit farther to see if that story idea like starts to excite me. But I felt like that opening promised a story that you don't see a lot of. Like you may see stories about like parents who are neglectful or abusive, but usually they're told from the child's perspective or from an outside perspective. But to have a story where you have a mother that's saying, I didn't want the baby to survive, but I'm going through those motions of what a mother is supposed to be doing. And that emotional story there is one that I think isn't explored a whole lot. And that's what I was hoping for. Like that's what I was excited for from that opening. And then, like I said, once it starts talking about like the husband is looking at the sister, and I was just kind of like, oh, all right. Like I thought there was this promise at the beginning that at this point, within these 250 words, it feels like that's not the promise that is going to get paid off in the rest of the story. Now, could be wrong. I could, beyond this, we could see that is what's going to happen. But in where it leaves us right now, it feels like that's not where it's going. And it left me with that point where I was feeling like, okay, well, I'll keep reading, hoping that's where it's going to circle back to. But it just, I wouldn't read much longer because I would be like, okay, well, the story that it seems to be leading into isn't as fresh and exciting as what I was hoping we were going to get from that very first beginning.
Yeah, I think what Lesley said is pretty much how I felt about this story. I pretty much put my hand up as soon as the baby died, mostly because I think I read those first couple paragraphs and I was like, yeah, I can go for a creepy kid story. That's going to be fun. Or a creepy mom story, maybe. I'm not really the target audience for like mom-child stories, though. So that's also maybe take that with a grain of salt. But like from the beginning, I'm like probably not going to be that as into this kind of a story unless it does something really explosive from the beginning. Like that's just kind of the way I am, I think. But yeah, as soon as it started talking about the husband and the sister and she had help, it's like, well, she's not completely isolated in her community. She's, I don't know, it just was not hooking me. And that promise that Lesley was talking about, that was what I was really interested in. So.
All right. That sounds like we're moving on to our next piece, which is dark science fiction. It begins, I am sick from my implant pulsing in my right temple. When a drone cuts the zip ties from my wrists, elbows, knees, and ankles. I sit up as its whirling fades away, while a chemical smell on my clothes nauseates me. My hearing warbles like when I had a childhood ear infection. The warehouse, awash in blinding white light, fuzzes around the edges. My head lolls, chin to chest, and I lean right. I almost lose consciousness, but for the spray of water upon my body. Drenched from matted hair to waterlogged shoes, I jolt awake. My breathing shortens and quickens. Teeth chattering, I look up. A sprinkler drips water from the high ceiling. The drones overhead, each with a carapace the size of a football and 4 helicopter rotors apiece, avoid the drops. When the stream stops, they reset. They fly in invisible lanes, but a near collision occurs high above, so they're more advanced than my Roomba. A drone breaks, and I'm gonna pause there.
All right, so I feel like what this beginning is missing is the why. Like, you're building, obviously this person has been taken hostage of some sort, they're zip tied, but there is nothing that tells us why. Like, they're not even, there's not even that thought, like that inner monologue that's going like, oh, I shouldn't have messed with so-and-so, or I shouldn't have done whatever. It just feels very like disconnect, because you would think that if you're in this sort of situation, if you don't know why you're in that situation, you're gonna be wondering, like, how did I get here? What? But instead, you're just it's just details of the physical, what's going on, without any of the emotional. And I would feel like, if water's dripping on me and I'm sick because, this implant is thumping in my temple and there's, drones, I feel like emotionally you would be kind of invested in that situation, and we're not getting any of that emotion at all. Like, it's just kind of a laundry list of the physical, what's going on, which doesn't, as a reader, doesn't connect me, because it could be a laundry list, a grocery list of anything. Like, you're just listing off the physical aspect with no emotional connection. So the entire time I kept thinking, we're going to get some sort of explanation why they're there. Who did they piss off? Did they, did they see the wrong thing, or do they not know? But there's no emotional connection there at all. It's just a list of the physical things that's going on. And, you can only read that for so long before being like, all right, and checking out, kind of, as a reader.
That exactly what Lesley said. A great term. A great phrase that my editor at Neon Hemlock used. He was so good. He would say, like, where's the interiority, or it needs more interiority, because, like, we're human beings. We're constantly telling like a little story inside ourselves. And even if you don't have an internal monologue, you're always trying to make sense of the world around you and, like, connect details and have like an interior experience of the world. And so this story didn't really have any of that. And even though there's like really cool science fictional stuff, it's always tricky when you're reading a piece with someone who's shut up in a small space, because the kind of world building is like, it's difficult, right? Like, you're only seeing such a tiny piece of the world. If we don't have the character latching onto it with like some kinds of thoughts or reflection or emotional responses, then we're like completely unmoored and we don't understand what's going on at all. And that's kind of what's going on in this piece for me. Was I'm like, well, this place really sucks. It could be like a closet in the Facebook headquarters, as far as I know, or it could be the far future, or gosh, I don't know. And I'm neither the character, and they don't seem to care. So, yeah, that's why I put my hand up.
Yeah, excellent points from Wendy and Lesley. I kind of get the feeling that this introduction starts at the wrong moment in your overall story. Either we need to start sometime before he is dropped right into this situation, or perhaps we just fast forward to the point where it is more appropriate to be given that information that Wendy and Lesley were mentioning that the reader needs. I would like to give some positives here. I felt the scene blocking was fantastic. It was very easy to imagine what he was going through. So the writing is really good. It's just, you need to figure out a better way to ease the reader into the story, and then save this bit of writing, and maybe you can plug and play it into a different part of the story.
Well said. Yeah. Good idea, Jason.
Yeah, I
Thank
mean,
you.
the details that we're getting about physically what's going on are solid. Like I can see what's physically happening to this person. It was just that lack of an emotional aspect, like a why. Like I want to see that character have an emotional response to what's happening.
It's a
to make
perfect
those
movie.
details feel more impactful.
Yeah. It's a perfect movie opening, right? Like you always see movies starting with this kind of a moment, but we're not reading movies, we're reading short stories, so you gotta play around sometimes.
Yeah, it is very cinematic and written in a very cinematic way.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, my co-host has left me, but we shall carry on regardless.
Oh.
I will do my best. Our next piece is a horror piece, and it begins, "It was the day before the night he'd turn, and Alex was just about as pissed off as any person staring down the long, sludgy hallways of the unknown would be. Turning 30 could have been so easy. It was so easy for everyone else. Get your friends, go out on the town, order drinks, hold your breath for 30 seconds, then party your way into your best decade like it's the end of the world. But not Alex. Oh no. Sasha threw him a can of beer and turned back to the cast iron pan where steaks were..." I will pause there.
Oh, I think I go first.
Yes, I believe it's you first, Wendy.
So I do think there's probably a pretty cool idea here. Like this idea, I mean, it's hard not to read ahead, because your eye kind of takes on the page. So it's like the idea that there's something special about turning, like capital T. Like that's the thing that the people who are listening can't see, is that you don't just turn 30, you turn 30, which I think is kind of cool and very Logan's Run. But for me, this prose wasn't super yummy or exciting, and then I just wasn't quite engaging with it at the level that I'd really like to be engaging with it. I felt you definitely have this feeling that this narrator is holding back something. He's like, why am I having a tough time? And instead of having him just wonder about it, I think maybe if it was more straight up, just laying that out, it might maybe have captured me a little bit more. Jason.
So I have a bugaboo about stories like this that open with a character who is pouty or unhappy and grumpy or pissed off at the world. We all are. Come on. you know. And it just, yeah, it just feels like an exercise in writing out your diary and getting your anger out on the page. Like Wendy said, feels like there may be a really interesting story here, but I just don't like the way we're pulled into the story. And as someone who is on the wrong side of 45, had seen your character being upset because they're getting ready to turn 30 turns me off just as a reader in general. Also, the prose, I felt it needed a little more distinction. I'm not sure. There's usually when we're doing these, there's always a very memorable turn of phrase, and we all gush about it. And at least for me, I did not see anything that stood out. Lesley?
Again, I feel like this is a story where the very opening seems to like promise something, and then immediately that's snatched away. Because it's like, it was like the night before he'd turn, and you're like, and I'm going, turn what? Like, what's he turning into? And then it's like, oh, he's going to turn 30. All right, well, again, what, and the very next sentence, it's like he's going, oh, like, just hold your breath, and then it's your best decade. And it's like, well, okay, well, if you're going to say that, and if the character is thinking that's what happens for everyone else, then, why is he looking down this metaphorical sludgy hallway that I was hoping was a real hallway? So again, it's just like, you need to be careful with your openings, that you're not laying out these expectations for some sort of story and then very quickly kind of like snatching that excitement. Because I know we all say, like, you need a great hook. You got to hook them in. But for editors and readers, I mean, when you read a lot of short fiction, if you're immediately kind of like promised one thing, and then the writer is like, ha ha ha, I cooked you, but actually that hook doesn't, there's no payback at the other end of it. It's just really super disappointing. So yeah, I really felt like that opening sort of promised like a turn, an exciting turn, maybe a horrifying turn. And instead he's turning 30, and I'm just kind of like, I just turned 40, and I'm kind of like, all right. It was just kind of a letdown.
So let me ask you, Lesley.
Huh?
If the author had said that there was a group of decaying, decrepit old editors creeping down this sludgy hallway, would that have worked better?
Yeah. Give me that's a cool story. What are they going to turn into? Are they going to turn into one of those editors? Like, maybe this is a promotion that's actually very scary.
Yeah. I think that would frighten a lot of readers.
Right. I felt like there was a promise there for something really cool and interesting, and instead it just felt like, it's like, okay, you're turning 30. First of all, people get so bummed out about that, and I'm kind of like, why? So I'm with Jason. Like, why are you pouting about 30? Like,
so I think the takeaway here is, like, if in your world turning 30 is something special, and it is something that's going to be a huge change in your life because of whatever happens in your world, we need to have a glimpse of that sooner, because otherwise people will just think it's like the normal kind of turning 30, even if you use a capital T. So
right. Yeah.
You
you need to
more clues earlier on to keep that going on. Yeah, I think.
Great point, Wendy. Thank you. You encapsulated that perfectly.
Awesome. I turned 30 this year, and I kind of want my like sludgy hallway or superpowers now.
You're like,
You're
where's my
seeing your
sludgy
future
hallway?
here.
Yeah, but while we wait for that, our next piece is another horror piece. And it begins, Annie Turner woke up sure there was someone in the room. She sat up on the bed and scanned the foot, where some part of the dark shifted or seemed to move independent of the overall space. Dad? At first, there was no answer, and she registered the figure's shape, how thin, and shaking like the flame at the tip of a candle. Dad, Annie said, not a question anymore. Say something. Perhaps he couldn't. So many possibilities, dancing like a coin, flipped through the air. None of them good, and then, Sarah? No, said Annie. It's Anne. Oh, Anne, said her father. Yes, said Annie. He remained. One arm raised a little above the hip, bent at the elbow, the hand fluttering near his mouth. Dad, was there something? That is all three.
So I go first this time.
Yeah, Jason, we're on you.
Okay. Very interesting premise. Always scary when you think there's someone in a dark room with you and you don't know who they are. But for the love of all that's unholy, get to it. This needs a little more urgency, a little more manipulation of the prose to generate some anxiety and fear. Yeah.
I mean, I get the feeling from this opening that this isn't necessarily something that Annie would find scary, because it seems like maybe this is something that happens pretty regularly. But that being said, like, I get that there's no anxiety or fear there, because she seems pretty quickly to realize that it's her dad and that he's probably going to be confused and all of that. But that, as an editor, makes me ask, why is that where you're starting the story? Is there another way? You know, having a parent that, I mean, he doesn't seem to realize he's in Annie's room. He's asking about Sarah, and that can be an anxiety-filling experience. But if in the middle of the night, him just showing up in your room is something that is just become sort of normal, then maybe that's not the right place to start the story. Like, maybe you need to not start it with her just waking up and finding him there, but have it something else during their day-to-day life that kind of shows that same thing, where maybe it's a new thing, like, oh, he forgot something different, to build that anxiety that Jason's talking about. Because it does seem like the author wants us to know that this is something that has become routine in Annie's life. Which is a good point, but maybe show that in a different place in the story, not right out of, you know, you don't necessarily want to start your stories with boring routine. You know, give us something to hook into, and then show us, like, this is the struggles that Annie's going through with her dad, who is, you know, wandering around the house at night. So I would just suggest really looking at, like, is this the place to start this story? If you're not wanting this to be a freaky thing for Annie to wake up to. Like, you kind of have to weigh, is this freaky and anxiety ridden for, you know, somebody's in my room at night? Or is this a routine, my dad wanders at night and he wanders in here and thinks I'm Sarah? So you got to kind of balance, like, what story are you trying to tell? Because, you know, you need to kind of pull the emotional, like, okay, because if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's always really hard to succeed with somebody just waking up at the beginning of a story, unless you're like writing, you know, the next Paranormal Activity story, in which case that would be exciting, and you wake up and there's an actual ghost in your bedroom, and holy yikes. And I was really disappointed that this wasn't like Paranormal Activity 2, more ghost boogaloo. And so it really did have like a feeling like I felt a little ripped off. It's like you do, you know, let's push the fishing metaphor as far as we can take it, right? So like the idea is your opening is a hook and you want the editor to take it, but like all fish, the next step of catching them, they have that little hook in their mouth, and the idea is you want them to swallow it. But fish can still spit it out if they feel like a pokey bit. And so like an editor is going to get excited and they're like, I love Paranormal Activity, chomp. Ugh, no, it's not that, spits it out. You know, my next thought was like, oh my gosh, maybe there's something wrong with the dad. Maybe he's got rabies. Maybe he's going to, you know, attack her. Maybe it's something more depressing than that. And then it was just like, Dad, Annie, Dad, Annie. And that was, no, don't do that. Like you can do it like once, okay? Like you only have so much white space on a page to play with, because that's part of the thing is like, I'm reading it sounds mean, but it's like, I only really look at that first page, and you have to like smoosh in as much like feeling in the first page as you can. And if you're using it up with white space from like really short bits of dialogue that aren't like revealing things, then you're wasting your first page. So like get immediately to what hurts. And I'm at an age now where I am watching my parents decline, and it's painful and horrible. And I've seen some amazing stories come through our slush pile that have to do with parents, like, you know, dealing with death issues. And these things are incredibly powerful. And that is like, this story, I have no idea what it's about, but there's a good chance it's really wrenching and powerful, but you're not getting to it on this first page. Instead, we just saw the wrong kind of hook for it. So finding a new way to get us into Annie's heart and get us into the true horror of whatever the situation is probably going to help the story a lot, because, I mean, you're dealing with like a really great and powerful idea.
All right. Thank you, panelists. And we're going into our final half hour of the event with another horror piece. I know it's gone by so fast. All right. Our next piece, as I mentioned, is horror, and it begins, "The first dead bird was in the parking lot. I don't know if the word embryo is correct, but it's what came to mind. A tiny, not fully formed bird corpse, as though delicately and purposefully extracted from its protective eggshell and placed on display on the pavement where we parked. I almost stepped on the damn thing as I got out of my car. Pale, featherless, prehistoric looking. Oh God, I said, still half in my car. I scanned the vicinity for remnants of its shell, but couldn't find any. What? Are you all right, Lindsay? Val, my best friend, asked from the passenger seat. Yeah, fine. Just stepped on a rock and almost fell. Spring in Michigan can be miserable 100 ways over, but occasionally, like that day, you can be rewarded for enduring a brutal winter with a sneak preview at summer. A breezy, yet sunny and warm Saturday afternoon. Valerie Thompson and I were out for a hike at Castle Dune Natural Area, taking the dune trail out to Lake Michigan to get fresh air, stretch our legs, and take cute pics of each other in nature. Our usual when the opportunity presented itself. We were surprised to see the parking lot at the trailhead nearly empty. A day like that, we expected to have to jockey for position on the trail. But there was only one other car. Maybe another person or group we'd cross paths with, or maybe not see them at all. And that is the end of the piece.
All right, I think I'm up first.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm going to say I absolutely love that first sentence. Because obviously we're going to get more dead birds. like the first dead bird was in the parking lot, and I don't know, for some reason I was like, ooh, okay, like what's going on? Are we having dead embryo birds falling from the sky? Like I liked that immediately, especially the fact that she's looking around for a shell. She can't find a shell. They're in a parking lot, so you imagine a parking lot's a pretty big, open, wide place. It, you know, even though they're going hiking, there isn't usually like trees in the middle of a parking lot. So like, did it fall from the sky? How did it get there? You know, all of that. I immediately was drawn in by that. And I really do feel like, especially because of that promise of the first dead bird, I feel like we could get into something that is like super juicy and like just gross and awesome and weird and like, because, you know, where are these dead birds coming from? Like, I don't know, like that's immediately where I was going. But then you have this little bit of conversation between Lindsay and Val, and I started to kind of get lost because it just felt like maybe the conversation didn't feel super like real to me. Like, you know, she's half in the car and she's like, Val's like, what? Are you all right? And she's like, I just stepped on a rock and almost fell. Why are you lying to Val? Like, wouldn't you, if you just found a dead bird, be like, oh my God, like there's a dead baby bird right here. Like there's no
gross.
tree.
Come look at this.
Right, exactly. Like, why are you just like, oh, I just fell on a rock. Like, I just wanted to be like, Lindsay, what's wrong with you? Like, you just found this, you know? That is where I really was kind of like, oh, all right, well, Lindsay, you're not taking it in the cool direction. You're veering away from that. And then you get this kind of long paragraph explaining what they're doing and about like the sneak preview of summer, and they're going out to take pictures. And again, I just felt again that you're veering away from the cool thing that I sincerely hope is at the heart of the story. Because that opening sentence, that openness promise of these dead birds is really cool. Like, but don't, like, you know, selfies on a hike, I'm just a little bit bored with. Like, that doesn't take me to that weird place. And so that's why I kind of was like, nope, I'm going to stop, because I'm afraid there's not going to be enough of that surreal, weird, how are these dead birds getting there? Like, it's not getting to me quickly enough. More dead birds in my fiction, apparently.
Well, like Lesley, I thought that first line was fantastic. It's so amazing. And not least of all the fact that this summer we got the heat dome here in Portland, and I spent the next 2 weeks walking around finding dead baby birds everywhere, and it was really horrifying and awful. And they're kind of gross and super creepy. Or flip that, they're really gross and kind of creepy. So for me, immediately that first line and the description of the dead baby bird was fantastic, because yeah, that's exactly what they look like. For me, that weird conversation was, for me, a good thing, because I was like, why the fuck are you lying to your friend? Like, what is wrong with you? There is something very strange going on with this girl, and I can't wait to see how this unfolds. So as you can see, that line could go either way, and probably Probably if this was a piece that like wound up being a super great piece and we were going to go run it, we would want to do some edits in this next section to give me a little bit more of a hint shortly afterward as to whether or not that line was a mistake. Like you're like, oh, what would I be saying to my friend if I was going hiking? I'm just going to put that in the story. Or if you were putting it in there to manipulate, if you're trying to suggest that there is something really super creepy going on. So like if there is something creepy, like put one more thread of that sooner. I'm willing to read through the really long section about like the hiking because I grew up in the dunes and I find them very, very creepy. And 2, the Michigan Lake Dunes are on my to like visit list. So that gives me a little extra bias, but mostly it's because I am always excited to read a story that's about people out in nature having scary experiences. So probably in like an editing stage, I'd maybe condense that, like tighten up that passage a bunch. And I don't think I don't really believe that the main character would be like thinking so much about like selfies and stuff because you want that undercurrent of the tension from the beginning to still be there, right? Because they're still freaked out about the dead bird and why ever they led to their friend. But setting it up as the idea of we're going to be in the bird apocalypse in the middle of the dunes on a hike is for me a super compelling idea.
Bird apocalypse.
So I think the first line is pretty good. I do think there's a missed opportunity here to get even more out of it. Instead of, giving us this giant paragraph about where they're going, what they're going to do, you could just tell us right there in that first sentence, the first dead bird was in the, what's it called? The
the name of the
Castle Dune natural area.
Lot.
Yeah, Castle Dune natural area.
Trailhead parking lot. Yeah, the Castle Dune natural area is trailhead parking lot. So that way, in the first sentence, we get something weird as shit is going on. We are told where we're at and what's about to happen. They're already going to hike. Economy in words. That's something you should always be aiming for, especially in short fiction. If this is indeed a short story, kind of feels like it will be. Your descriptions, though, of the eggshell and the pale featherless prehistoric thing and her stepping on it, that was kind of cool. I'm kind of siding with Lesley on the why is she lying to her friend. Although if this is something that pays off later in the story, then it's fine. It can just be a personality quirk, or it could be, our protagonist has something nefarious going on, or she's just a pathological liar. I don't know.
Or maybe she knows why it's there, which that would be really cool if that was the payoff.
Yeah, and this would kind of be like not I guess a little foreshadowing, Easter egg kind of thing, saying, well, here, it was on the very first page of what was going to happen if you were attentive. So I ended up raising my hand because that last paragraph, it goes on for 9 lines, total of 135 words, which is over half of what this little excerpt was. It's just, I don't think you even need it if you change that first line, like I mentioned.
That's a good idea, because then you can not have Instagram selfies and get sucked into that whole distracting bit.
Yeah, or maybe tie the Instagram selfies into a scene later where
right, yeah, exactly.
terrible happens because they're doing an Instagram selfie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole Instagram selfie thing definitely tells us a little bit about these characters, like that, rather than the purpose of the trip is to take the hike and they happen to take a picture for Instagram to commemorate the hike. They're actually there to get the photo. Like that does give you a bit of characterization, but it can be conveyed in a way that doesn't eat up as many of your words. Like,
and like right now, that's just kind of shifting away the tone from like.
It is, and so it like, yeah, that definitely is something that tells us something about these characters, other than Lindsay's a liar, but I think it can be conveyed in a way that better suits the story.
Awesome. Great discussion. Fittingly for today, our next piece is another horror piece. So well into a spooky streak. And we begin. This is the moment in the story when the plucky survivors go outside. It sounds ludicrous, a sure road to death. They're leaving the bunker they built and burrowed into, safe when everyone else was dying or disappearing or something. But there's always a good reason at the time. Maybe they're low on something important. Food, water, sanity. Something changed, and now the safe haven is not so safe. The static on the radio briefly formed words, and that's as good an excuse as any to commit suicide. Or maybe there's nothing wrong, and they've been torturing themselves for no reason at all. We'd been cleaning up, May and I, out on our late parents' retirement indulgence, a farm and orchard several hours south of San Francisco. The 3 days into the slow torture of opening drawers and sifting through letters like dead leaves, the reception cut off. No bars, not a single G. No internet, not even through the actual cord attached to the actual computer in my mother's study. I was talking to my husband when it happened. Work, 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 Kevin said, trying to sound unhappy. He'd been promoted, and I will stop there.
Okay, I think Wendy.
Oh, sorry. Well, I mean, I love apocalypse stories like a lot, but I want to be extremely excited by them, and I want to see lots of new exciting things start. So immediately I was like, okay, it's a bunker, it's the apocalypse. I wasn't drawn in a whole lot. And then there was that neat line about maybe they've been torturing themselves for no reason at all. And then we jump back in time to this like prosaic setting of like the beginning of the apocalypse. And so I was like, oh, I really wanted a post-apocalyptic story. I wanted to get to them coming out of the bunker. That is what I was excited about. And I'm not getting it. Also, I feel like these meta kind of beginnings are kind of tricky, right? If they're not immediately dialing into, if a short story isn't immediately dialing into a character, it has to be like doing something metatextual in an extremely clever way. And it needs to be like waving the flag very early on, like, I'm going to be extremely clever. So for me, this opening was like talking about what survivors do in apocalypses and why they go outside. Like, I think getting to the line about maybe there's nothing wrong and they've been torturing themselves for no reason at all. Like, I would want to see that as the last line in the first paragraph. I would, like, for me, that would be much more effective because I know all the reasons why people go out of bunkers in the movies. I've watched them all on my couch with popcorn. I've read all the books. So it's like you have to, for somebody like me I need to get to there's something different and unusual about this setup immediately. So
the biggest thing that are you going next to me?
I think it's Jason.
Go ahead.
In theory, it's Jason.
Go ahead, Lesley.
But-
Okay,
We'll
I'm
allow
sorry.
it.
I'm just going to jump in. I was very excited to speak. The biggest thing that's jumped out at me right in the beginning is, like Wendy said about this meta beginning. Like, I kept feeling like, where are our characters? Like, it took quite a bit of time before we had any characters. And then, you had this is the moment in the story when the plucky survivors go outside. I really enjoy that. But then immediately show me the characters going outside. But I don't feel like, because we're going back to the very beginning of whatever's happening, because we're seeing the cell phones cut out and all of that. So to me, that these aren't survivors yet. If we're at the beginning, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're telling me survivors, I want them to have survived something. And just surviving the cell networks going down does not count. Like, that's not surviving. Like, they've not done anything to be a survivor yet. So I was very confused almost by the timing of this. One thing that when Wendy was talking about the pacing, like, do something different. If you would break up this whole little beginning where it's kind of narrating what they're doing and kind of use that as almost story breaks in between different scenes of these survivors actually surviving something, like somebody's on the outside narrating what they're doing, that would be interesting. That would be cool if you were okay, this is the moment when our plucky survivors go outside, then show us they're going outside. And then maybe show, what is it? Did they run out of food? And then show us, okay, they're running low on food. Or did they run out of this? And then show us that. That would be different. And something that I'd be going, okay, all right, I'm buying into this. I want to keep reading this. But to have it all crammed together right there at the beginning, and you're saying, here's our survivors, and this is, why are they going out? And then you're dialing it back and you're like, well, we finally get characters, but in my estimation, they really aren't survivors yet. They've not earned that title. It just at that point, and I was just she's on the phone with her husband, and I'm just okay, I'm out. That's where you lost me. All right, they're not survivors. They not yet. And could their story be very, very cool? Yes, their story could be awesome. But again, I didn't feel like these characters haven't earned what we were given at the beginning. Not yet. So I'd like to see that. How did they earn it? Sorry for jumping ahead of you, Jason.
That's okay. I'll survive. I'm plucky.
Yeah.
So I can kind of see how the story should play out. So we have this meta commentary, and we find out at the end that it is being written or journaled or spoken by one survivor who has survived this experience of going out. And it's really, the meta commentary stuff is really solidly well written. So I think if you were to do that and were to carry it through the story, that part will be pretty strong. So let's say you put a section break after, and they've been torturing themselves, so no reason at all. Here we have another situation of where the story is starting in the wrong place. You've kind of got two parallel stories here. You got the meta commentary and the actual adventure going outside. And the adventure part is starting at the wrong place. I think you need to start it with perhaps showing them receiving the message. And then that's a good way of allowing all your primary characters to interact, talk about, you know, what this is, and that way we can form, okay, so this guy's the cynic and this woman is the realist, you know, that kind of stuff. Think about, you know, like in the movie Alien, when they all had this big meeting to figure out, you know, what the hell is on this ship and what should we do about it. You really get some character insight based on how each one wants to approach the problem. And then from there, since we were promised, you know, that they're leaving and they got a message, we see the message, and then they can leave, and then immediately something big happens, and then we go to the next meta commentary. Just an idea for how you can take this idea or take this plot and kind of rearrange it, rework it a little bit, and make it into something that I think would please the three of us more.
I think like it's been great. Like so many of these stories have sort of really kind of reinforced this idea that you need to craft an attention-getting beginning, but the attention that you get, you want it to be the right attention. You don't want your signposts to be like, you know, death ahead, warning, and then there's just like a bump in the road. Or you don't want it to be like, turn around because nothing good will happen, but then you wind up at Schenectady or something. Or although maybe that's a real sign. So it's really been really fun to talk about how these openings like wind up connecting with our expectations and how to play with them so much. It's been really fun.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like we've had a lot of really good examples in all of these story parts that we've been reading where you have an opening that holds a promise that immediately connects to all of us as readers, and then that promise doesn't seem to be followed through, or if it's followed through later in the story, it's like, here's this promise, but we're going to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff first before we get to the promise, which can let a reader down. You know, you're setting this expectation for what this story is going to be, and then it's like it veers off course, and you're like, wait, go back to the promise. So
Man, beginnings are hard, huh?
Oh, beginnings are so hard. They really are. But I think that we've had a lot of examples of where it's like, hey, you're giving us this promise that as readers, we're all like, hey, that's pretty cool. I like that. And then it just, the follow through kind of falls flat and doesn't serve that promise that you set up.
Yeah. And it's not that these aren't, like, all of these beginnings, I mean, we're seeing some great writing, and so it's not like that people are not good at their craft. It's just that, you know, it's something you have to learn, is how to shape that beginning to just consistently keep reeling the big fish along.
Right.
Sorry, I kind of got meta for a second.
It's all good. I am learning tons.
So let's try to do one more.
Yeah, I was going to say we've probably got time for one more. So our final piece is a dark science fiction story. It begins. I've been providing the girlfriend experience to Albert for almost 2 years when he takes me to the 3D scanning lab. He says it's for a present, but he's cagey when I ask for details, even when we're standing in front of the large glass booth. The scan will take about 2 hours, and it doesn't hurt at all, he assures me. I trust that much. Albert's not a sadist. 100 Tuesday evenings, and he hasn't even pulled my hair or slapped my ass. The tech stands a little to the side, looking bored or maybe uncomfortable. Albert and my relationship isn't always clear at first glance. He's charming, late 40s, full head of hair, decent build. I'm early 30s, plump, and maybe just a bit too alternative for him with my tattoos and blue hair. But we're almost in a traditional relationship. I've dropped my other clients. He doesn't date anyone else. It's just that we only meet on Tuesdays, and he pays me. I'm not worried about pain, I say. I know what these scans can be used for. Sex dolls, heck, a fleshed-out robot that looks and feels just like me. Are you trying to replace me? Mass produce me? Jenna, Albert gives a little laugh. I don't want to share you, and there's no replacing you. Like I said, it's a present. I tilt my chin to the tech. How much do women get paid for a scan? She shrugs. I just run the machine. All right, I think we're starting with you, Jason.
Okay. So initially I was a little iffy, solely based on the phrase girlfriend experience and what the connotations and what, it's kind of a loaded phrase. It brings with it certain visuals and ideology. And it's not necessarily a subject matter that, at least for me, I'm particularly interested in. But you won me over with the tone. I really enjoyed this little touch of humor, knowing winks that I feel like the writer is kind of giving the reader here in a couple of instances. And honestly, I am kind of curious as to what kind of birthday gift is he planning to give Jenna. That it's dark sci-fi, I'm led to believe this is not going to end well with Jenna. There's probably a little room for tweaking some word choices and streamlining some of the narrative so that it flows better. But for this editor, I found this opening to be perfectly fine, and I'm happy to continue reading.
It's funny because I really liked that opening sentence, especially the girlfriend experience wording, because I was like, okay, a girlfriend experience is different than, a call girl or a prostitute. Like, that's different. That's a different thing, and it's a different connotation to me. And so when I saw that, I was like, okay, like, girlfriend experience. I'm like, all right, let me see, like, what exactly is the girlfriend experience, Like, I liked that opening. And I agree with Jason. I mean, this really kind of pulled me in. I would definitely keep reading. The one thing that I would suggest, that third paragraph, where it's talking about like the text stands to the side and then it kind of describes both of the characters, I would maybe streamline that just a little bit, just because it's a lot of description just in one clump. But as far as where the story is going, I'm kind of down for it. I like it because I love the fact that she immediately is like, all right, yeah, I'm not worried about it hurting. Like, are you replacing me? Because, she's got a standing Tuesday gig. She's getting paid for every week. And like, it's obviously something that, she's cut off all the other clients. This has been going on for 100 Tuesdays, which I thought was a really clever way to show the passage of time, like how much time has been going on. the fact that she asked the tech, like, how much do women get paid? She's obviously, even though they're almost a normal relationship, she's definitely still thinking about the money portion of it. And I liked that little kind of tidbit of information about Jenna's character. It's like, okay, well, I like him. He's a good enough guy. He's good enough that he's the only one who's my only client, but I still have to get paid. Like, if he's trying to replace me, I want to find out, like, how much should I be getting for this so I can, to set myself up. So I liked that. I really enjoyed that. That was very good details.
I agree. The voice of this piece, you're immediately immersed in the main character's perspective, and you immediately have a sense of like what motivates her and what's important to her and her outlook on the world, right? Like, she's a little bit snarky, but she wants to protect herself. She's worldwide. She's a businesswoman. And I really, really like reading pieces where just from the first sentence, you just feel like you get the character. And I like that a lot. I thought that the science fictional details are worked in and just smooth, believable. Like, they just, you just read over them. They didn't stick out or anything. They just were there and being great. I love the phrase, the girlfriend experience, because like, what is an ersatz girlfriend? And at the beginning, you're not sure, like, is she a woman? Is she, like, is this going to be, like, all on a computer? Like, that to me was like, oh, let's see what this means. It's very intriguing and pulled me in. And I'm always on board for, like, a creepy sex doll story or weird sex workers in space or whatever. So this was all like my jam. So anyway, I just had a really fun time reading this piece and would keep reading for sure.
All right. Oh, what a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much to the panel. And thank you for joining us for Snap Judgment number 2. We hope the feedback and insight provided by our editors has been useful and entertaining. On behalf of Apex, we want to thank all the authors brave enough to submit their work for review. It's a brave act to simply submit a story via standard channels, but sending an excerpt for a live editorial reaction takes someone with guts of steel. So a round of applause to all of our contributing authors today. A big thank you to our editors. And in particular, guest panelist and Nightmare Magazine editor-in-chief, Wendy Wagner. You can follow Wendy via Twitter at her handle @WNWagner. And hey, if you'd like to see Apex do more of these kinds of events for readers and writers, then don't forget to subscribe. You can head on over to apex-magazine.com for subscription and backing information. Snap Judgment number 3 is planned for January 2022, so we will see you then. Until that time, this is KT Bryski wishing you all a very happy Halloween.